Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
Okay, so we're going to continue our examination of rainforest ecology today. And in particular, we're going to look at a problem that's been puzzling researchers for a long time. Something that we've noticed when we compare temperate climate habitats, areas where it can get both pretty hot and pretty cold over the course of the year. When we compare those habitats to tropical ones, where it's pretty much hot and wet all year round. Like in a rainforest. Well, what we've seen is that there's a much greater biodiversity of animals in tropical climates than in temperate climate ones. Not that there are more animals necessarily, but that there are more different species of animals, in particular birds, reptiles and insects. So, why is that? Well, one way that scientists have tried to explain this phenomenon is by what's called the equitability-stability hypothesis. This hypothesis, this theory, posits that a climate that is more or less stable, warm and without big changes in temperature, that this would result in species being able to grow in number over long periods of time. Okay, so scientists use this theory to explain the extinction of large mammals like mammoths and mastodons in the northern part of the world. They think, okay, well, this part of the world had a major ice age, then it warmed up, and this is what killed off these big mammals. So, over time, this kind of variation in temperature must have resulted in fewer kinds of animals. And conversely, the tropical regions didn't ice over, so the species that lived there just thrived. Not as many died off, so now there are more kinds of life there than anywhere else. Now this sounds like a pretty reasonable idea, right? But actually, it doesn't hold up. Because as our understanding of the fossil record has gotten better, it's become less and less supportable. The idea that temperature changes were really responsible for the mass extinctions of animals in temperate climate habitats. In fact, in the case of the mammoth and mastodon, scientists now think that it was actually overhunting by humans that led to their being killed off. Imagine that. So okay, that hypothesis is out, and now where do we go? What's the real reason behind all that biodiversity in the tropical regions? Well, there's another theory that also focuses on climate, but in a different way. Some people call it a productivity hypothesis. It says that tropical areas, more so than temperate climate ones, that they receive greater amounts of two of the most important, let's say, building blocks. Two of the building blocks most essential to the creation of life. And these are, well, of course, water's one. And, we don't call them rainforests for nothing, right? I mean, they get a lot of rain. So we have one building block, water, we have that in excess. And the other is, anybody? Well, it's sunlight. Even though it rains a lot in tropical regions, they also receive, in general, more sunlight than temperate zones. 'Cause there's no real difference between seasons. I mean, in a rainforest, the sun shines in winter about as much as in summer. So the productivity theory says that with these two resources present in large amounts, the ecological system has more energy, and can sustain more life and more varieties of life. How does this happen? Well, first of all, that sunlight and water create a virtual explosion of vegetation, plants everywhere. This is kind of what you picture when you think of the rainforest, right? So the plant life starts it all off. More types of plants lead to more types of herbivores, the animals that feed on the plants. And if there are more kinds of herbivores, they support the existence of more kinds of predators who feed on them, okay? So, you see, it just continues on up the food chain like that. More sun and rain equal more different plants, which equals more different animals, which means more biodiversity. Very interesting, I think. But don't get too excited. The productivity theory has plenty of flaws, just like the equitability-stability idea we discussed earlier. For one, sure, more sun and rain will result in more plants, but it doesn't necessarily have to result in a greater variety of plants, see? What's the connection there? No one can say, and there have been some studies that show that more resources, like the sunlight and water we've been talking about, that more of those things can actually decrease productivity, In other words, it's possible to have too much rain and too much sun. As you can see, this complicates things and creates questions that the productivity hypothesis hasn't been able to answer.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. Number 6. What is the talk mainly about? Number 7. Why does the professor mention mammoths and mastodons? Number 8. In the lecture, the professor describes two theories that try to explain tropical biodiversity. Indicate which theory each of the following ideas is associated with. Click in the correct box for each phrase. Number 9. According to the productivity hypothesis, how do sunlight and rain increase biodiversity? Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
In fact, in the case of the mammoth and mastodon, scientists now think that it was actually overhunting by humans that led to their being killed off. Imagine that.
Number 10. What does the professor mean when he says this?
Imagine that.
Number 11. Why does the professor say this?
So okay, that hypothesis is out. And now, where do we go? What's the real reason behind all that biodiversity in the tropical regions?